There are only two real end games are we come to some negotiated agreement. In other words, ultimately, there's not a military solution to this. It's a diplomatic solution. And we're very far from the good negotiating table right now. Or two, you take over the entire country and occupy the country, change the regime.
Welcome to another episode of Global Power Shift. I'm Jim Stenman, and joined as always by my co-host, I should say, Suzanne Kianpour in Washington. Special thanks to everyone for joining us live on LinkedIn today. We have a very excited guest, and that is Congressman Seth Moulton. Before he was a lawmaker, he was a Marine Corps infantry officer for combat tours in Iraq, Bronze Star, first company into Baghdad, and he now sits on the House Armed Services Committee and has been one of the most direct voices on what's actually happening in the Iran war and what it means beyond the battlefield. So today we're going to be going quite wide. We'll be discussing Iran, the choke points, Ukraine's new role in Gulf air defense, and the Horn of Africa. In terms of my first question, I mean, you were, as we stated there, the first Marine company into Baghdad. You fought in Najaf. When the F-15E went down over Iran and crew went missing, what did you feel? I mean, both of them were recovered in the end, but the window of not knowing, how does that feel as someone who knows what it's like to be there and experience similar things when you're in war?
Well, and you obviously know that those pilots are at tremendous risk. And they're at risk from enemy forces. They're at risk from the environment. Good chance that they were injured, which it turns out one of them was. And they're at risk from just civilians who may be just very angry at them. I mean, I remember hearing the stories of John McCain in Hanoi as he was describing getting pulled out of the lake where his plane, where he landed with his parachute after his plane was shot down. And understandably, the North Vietnamese civilians were furious because he had just been bombing their city, right? So he now has an amazing level of trust and respect and understanding that he developed over the years. He now is hailed as a hero in Hanoi because of everything he's done after the war. But his initial treatment was pretty bad. So of course we were concerned about the pilot. And I actually had the honor of commanding a Marine platoon that was specially trained to recover downed pilots. And we had a mission to do that in Iraq. And we went in after a plane that had been shot down, not knowing if we might get shot down ourselves. So I was also thinking about all the recovery forces that were being put into the air at tremendous risk right after this jet had been shot down. I mean, frankly, it's easier to shoot down a helicopter than it is to shoot down an F-15.
Congressman, you have said that Iran is winning the war. However, isn't it a big deal that these two pilots were able to be rescued from behind enemy lines, from
Of course.
inside Iran?
I mean, look, the fact that Iran is winning the war strategically takes nothing away from the tactical and operational abilities or successes of our U.S. military. We have the best military in the world by far. I'm very proud to be a Marine veteran myself, and it was a brilliant operation to recover this pilot. But let's not forget, he was shot down 24 hours after the President of the United States told all of America and all of the world that he had eliminated all of their anti-aircraft capabilities. So that was obviously either an outright lie or just a gross misunderstanding of the situation. Every pilot flying missions over Iran now understands that their commander-in-chief was just lying to the American people about that. But to step back for a second to the strategic situation, Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz, which was open before this war started. Iran has retained its capability to fire ballistic missiles and drones, which we set out to eliminate. They really did have a regime change. They now have a more hardline regime than they had before. That's a win for Iran and against our interests. Oil has doubled. They're making much more money off of selling oil than they were before this crisis. And as far as we know, they still have the capability to uh, at least reconstitute their nuclear program. We don't know exactly how much they have maintained, but in the long run, all that really matters is how quickly they rebuild all these capabilities. And one of the most fundamental aims of our operation, according to the president, was simply to stop their power projection in the Middle East. Well, all you need to do is spend 5 minutes on the news to see that Iran is projecting power much more violently and effectively today than they were before Trump started this war of choice. So it's just hard to look at this honestly and say that America is winning the war despite our operational and tactical successes.
I suppose, are you surprised, first off? Are you surprised to see how things have unfolded in terms of how Iran has responded? No, why?
No, I mean, anyone who's spent any time in the Middle East could expect this. You've had multiple former commanders from the Middle East, very high level people, including Secretary Mattis, who was my commanding general in the 1st Marine Division, but of course, subsequently served as one of the secretaries of defense in Trump's first term, saying, of course, you should expect the Strait of Hormuz to be closed. But more broadly, I mean, I can remember, kind of casually joking with friends in Iraq, on difficult days, this is bad, but at least we're not in Iran. Because everyone knows that Iran would be far, far more difficult, even than Iraq, and Iraq was not easy.
How can the world's most powerful military not have crushed a place like Iran by now? And I think also, how important is who the commander in chief is, particularly for, I think, maybe morale of the soldiers. The tweet or Truth Social post that the president published yesterday was shocking, to say the least. What was your reaction? As a Marine, and you read that, how would you have felt from your commander in
Embarrassed,
chief?
grossly embarrassed that a commander in chief is perpetrating war crimes and going to ask servicemen and women to execute on those war crimes. I mean, this is exactly what we've been decrying Vladimir Putin for doing in Ukraine for years. I mean, it's what we decry despots all over the world for doing, attacking civilians, attacking civilian infrastructure. I mean, this is not a gray area. But I want to go back to your earlier point, which was just, okay, how can America be in this position? Well, there's really only two end games here. There's this myth that you can win wars by air power. It's just not borne out by practical experience. There are only two real end games are we come to some negotiated agreement. In other words, ultimately, there's not a military solution to this. It's a diplomatic solution. And we're very far from the good negotiating table right now. Or two, you take over the entire country and occupy the country, change the regime. This really matters when you look at specific things like, okay, what would ground troops do? We've got all these ground troops that Trump has brought belatedly to the Middle East. Obviously, he was not anticipating all these problems, or he would have brought them to the Middle East before the war started. He's run into trouble. He's gotten he's kicked a hornet's nest and his foot stuck in it. So he's trying to figure out a way out. And one proposal is to use a bunch of ground troops. Well, you could put them on Karga Island, where this much talked about oil export terminal for the Iranians. You could walk through a couple of different scenarios, whether they destroy the oil infrastructure or whether they don't, how these things play out. But at the end of the day, there's one simple fact that everyone should know, which is that Karga Island is not in the Strait of Hormuz. So it's just a tactic to gain leverage. It doesn't actually open the strait. The second thing you could do is you could put a whole bunch of Marines and soldiers along the shores of the strait. But not only could the Iranians just shoot anti-ship missiles over your heads unless you occupied thousands of square miles of that coastline, but at the end of the day, they're just going to control the strait when you leave anyway. So unless you plan to put troops there indefinitely under constant attack from the rest of the country, that's not a long-term solution either. Now, some people have said that you can use the troops to get the uranium, but that doesn't open the strait. So the point is, when you walk through these scenarios, you realize that there's just not a good answer here unless you want to take over the country. And remember, we invaded Iraq with about 100,000 troops. Pretty much everyone agreed that that was not enough. We should have had more. And Iran is twice the size. So there's just not a lot of strategic thinking going on here. And at the end of the day, does that surprise me? Does it surprise me that someone who is a completely unserious commander in chief, who despises the troops and got 5 deferments himself to get out of serving in Vietnam, does it surprise me that he would make asinine decisions like this? No, it doesn't surprise me at all, sadly.
I
Seth,
think for
as someone
our
who's
just one more follow for or Jim, I think for our audience, can you read the post? Because I realized we didn't read the post that we were just discussing.
Truth Social post, I don't actually have it in front of me. I can find it.
I think he said something about like Monday would be bridges and Tuesday would be power plants or something, just going through
Yeah.
a list of civilian infrastructure that he wants to bomb to send them back to the Stone Ages. And I don't know. I mean, are more girls' schools going to be on that list, Mr.
Mhm.
President? You've already killed 180 Iranian little girls going to school because of your war. What else is
Seth,
next?
as someone who's spent a lot of time in the Middle East, obviously, I mean, we know that you're disappointed in the president, but what does it do to drop F bombs in a message like that and then at the same time invoke Allah? What message does that send to some of our or some of your, I'm not American, closest allies in the Middle East and the Gulf in particular? Because I imagine behind closed doors that must have gone down very badly.
Behind closed doors, people at all levels of government spend countless hours cleaning up for what the president says. And I've seen this on my own time on the House Armed Services Committee, countless meetings with officials overseas where Republicans are apologizing and making excuses vainly for things that the commander in chief says that might be good for his politics with his base, but are severely detrimental to our country, to our national security, and to our troops. And we can't lose sight of that impact. This callous disregard for even our allies in the Middle East and parts of their culture, parts of their religion that, whether we agree with it or not, are deeply, deeply personal and important to them.
I think what's interesting also is how even MAGA is disappointed and upset about how this is going. I mean, after the we're going to bomb them back to the Stone Ages comment, I had MAGA people in my DMs disappointed, not just necessarily because of that, but because they felt like there was no kind of clear end game. How are they going to finish the job? How are they going to make sure they win? There was none of that. But what I wanted to ask you is, you served 4 tours in a war, and for people who aren't as familiar, I mean, that's more than average. Is that correct to say? You served 4 tours in a war so that you opposed. So you opposed this war, and because you didn't want anyone going in your place. So how does that feel now, like watching this from a congressional office and actually making an effort at joining the Senate? How does that feel?
I mean, look, many of us were highly critical of the war in Iraq, or at least critical of parts of it, and how it was being carried out, how it was being executed. Lots of decisions all along the way. And yet we had a clear mission, and we even had a clear end game. I mean, we understood. I would take my Marines on a nighttime patrol in a neighborhood of a certain city in Iraq, and I could say, look, our mission is to secure this neighborhood so that our battalion can secure this city. And if we can secure it so that they can vote and they can elect a new government, then we can go home. And that might have sounded fanciful, and there are plenty of missteps along the way. But you have to admit that at the end of the day, that did kind of happen. And Iraq does have a new government today. It's a far from perfect democracy, but a lot of our Iraqis would argue that it's better than the brutal dictatorship under Saddam Hussein they had before. But there's no clear endgame here with Iran at all. And there was a moment in 2004 on my second deployment when a corporal in my platoon came up to me at the end of a tough day, and he said, "You know, sir," you ought to run for Congress someday so that this shit doesn't happen again.
Mm,
And that is
yeah.
fundamentally why I ran for Congress. I didn't grow up interested in politics. I had no politicians in my family. And in fact, I think the first congressman that my parents met was me. Don't have any family money or anything. Didn't study politics in school. I actually have a physics degree of all things. And so this is not the career path that I expected at all. But it was largely driven by that sentiment that we've got to get more veterans to serve, more people who understand firsthand the costs of war when it comes to making these decisions. And to think back to what that corporal told me, and now be sitting in Congress on the House Armed Services Committee, and yet not quite able to stop this from happening again, it honestly, it tears me apart because I really feel like I'm failing, and it's why I'm so outspoken about this. It's why I'm fighting so hard, and there's even a piece of it that's in my race for Senate now because I'm running for Senate against someone who's 80 years old and a longtime public servant, but someone who voted to send me to Iraq, and I think that was a mistake. And yet, as much as I am using every power that I have to try to stop this mistake from happening again, another guy who dodged his own service in Vietnam uh, is not afraid to send other people's kids to die in the Middle East.
I think it's really powerful hearing that from you, and it's really powerful hearing kind of your humanity come out, because I think what I find, whether I've been covering in war zones on the ground or from here in Washington, is often there's this disconnect and the humanity of all of this is lost. And I think, you know, what was interesting when the pilots went missing in Iran, obviously I'm half Iranian, and so our conversations within our community was kind of, we cope with humor. And so there were jokes about how actually, if the Iranians find him, they'll give him a nice shower and feed him kebabs, and they'll keep him safe from the regime, because there are quite a few people who, are want to be liberated. And so I'm thinking back to what you said about Iraq and how, in a way, at least, they were left with something less bad than Saddam Hussein. I'll never forget, I was in Tehran in 2005. I was stuck in traffic, and my uncle was very proud that his American niece was visiting, and he started chatting with the guy in the car next door, next to us. And the man turned to me, and in Persian, he said to me, "Go back and tell George Bush you liberated Karbala. Please come and liberate us." And that was you. That's what you were doing. You were doing that in Iraq at the time.
Yeah, but you know what? If that Iranian had seen dozens of his relatives killed, as was the case with many in Iraq, he probably wouldn't agree with that. I mean, I'm not saying that the Iraq War was the right decision, that it was worth the costs, extraordinary costs, not only to America but to Iraqis as well. I was making the point that at least we had a mission. I mean, in a sense, even at least Congress had taken a vote. I mean, I think that a number of people made a mistake in voting to authorize the war in Iraq, did not ask the tough questions of the Bush administration, kind of naively believed their lies about weapons of mass destruction and whatnot. It's the job of people in Congress to be in the room to ask those tough questions. But at least there was a vote. At least there was a clear mission. Those things don't exist for Iran now at all. And I firmly believe that there should be a regime change in Iran. I mean, let me be clear. The Iranian regime is downright evil. They chant death to America. They've done so for decades. They chant death to their own citizens and massacre them in the streets. I mean, this is a horrifically evil regime. They are the world's number one state sponsor of terrorism. All that should stop. But the idea that we are going to change their regime to a more peaceful regime with a few bombs is just ridiculous. And And actually, if you wanted to do what you could to set the conditions for regime change from within, for the Iranian people to actually be successful in countering the regime, then you want to build up pro-Western sentiment. You want to strengthen the moderates in Iran. You do that by things like diplomatic agreements, because that gives power to the moderates. Tearing up treaties or agreements that you've signed, like Trump did in his first term to Obama's nuclear deal, that empowers the hardliners, because they're the ones who said you can't work with these people to begin with. What are you thinking? You know, and given the actually extraordinary amount, which you obviously know way better than I do, Susie, the extraordinary amount of pro-American sentiment on the ground in Iran, it's hard for me to think of a better way to dispel that sentiment than to just bomb them, to bomb Tehran, right? But there is actually one better way, and that is to bomb Tehran with the Israelis. I mean, so it's like if you were literally trying to come up with the perfect recipe for turning the pro-American Iranian people against us, this is what you would do. And lo and behold, we do have a new leader in Iran, and he's more hardline, and he's also just in better health, more vibrant, may prove to be a more effective leader, we have yet to see, than the 86-year-old in failing health that he replaced.
So, in terms of short-term solutions, or at least an off-ramp, obviously Trump has that deadline coming up tomorrow. What does an off-ramp look like in terms of something immediate that would lead to some sort of ceasefire? Because the Gulf region has paid a really high price over these past few weeks.
That's right. And honestly, I think that the news, excuse me, I think the news is suppressing just how bad the damage has been. We're talking billions of dollars in damage because of this war, which is another measure of, is that called winning, Mr. President? That doesn't sound like winning to me. But for an off ramp, I mean, you've got to come back to the fundamental problem here, which is that Iran holds more cards than we do right now, because they're the ones commanding the strait. They're the ones holding oil hostage. They're the ones holding the global economy hostage to a certain degree. And I just don't see a scenario where a few more bombs is going to change their mind on this. And so if the end game, again, unless you want to occupy the whole country, which no one's arguing for, if the end game is getting back to the diplomatic table, then you got to just be really smart about how you're going to get there. And honestly, I think that what we don't want to do is get dug in deeper here and give the Iranians more leverage going forward. I mean, thank God we got that pilot back. But imagine if he had been a hostage. That would give the Iranians another card that they get to play in negotiations. What if our bombing over the next few days does result in some American airmen getting captured? What if we put ground troops in and a number of them are killed, but some of them are captured as well? That gives the Iranians more leverage. So what we do not want to do is to go into these negotiations with more leverage on the other side. So unless there's a very clear plan to give us more leverage, I would say let's quit now and not when we're further behind.
Do any of the regional countries kind of hold the key here in terms of diplomacy? Obviously, the Omanis and the Qataris, they're well known for their diplomatic efforts. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I've been in conversation with several of these ambassadors, and fortunately, a number of us have longstanding relationships with these allies because of our time in the Middle East, and I say that not just from being a Marine in Iraq, but as a member of the House Armed Services Committee here, and they are key to bringing this to a successful conclusion. And I know that many of them want to see that. Now, the thing you have to remember about the Middle East, not telling you two anything you don't know, is that public statements and private statements are not always the same. right? And so you may hear public statements from some of these Gulf countries saying, rah, rah, Mr. President, crush Iran even further. It's not what they're saying behind the scenes. They recognize exactly what I just laid out, that there has to be a diplomatic conclusion to this. And and I want to say something more too, because we're talking a lot about just literally how to end the hostilities, right? But if you acknowledge that Iran is an evil regime, I mean, I've seen Iran kill Americans in Iraq. I personally been targeted by Iranian mortars in Najaf, 20 years ago. If you've seen that and you understand the long-term threat here, then you have to have a diplomatic agreement at the end of the day that doesn't just end the current hostilities and reopen the strait. It's got to have a way to prevent them from projecting power in the future. And it doesn't really matter whether you kill, you knock out 90% of their ballistic missiles or 97%. What matters is how they rebuild them, how quickly they reconstitute, and what they're going to do with them in the future. Same with their nuclear program. Remember, it was just months ago that Trump promised us, it's obliterated, and Hegseth said it's obliterated. I mean, maybe we should all look up the definition of obliterated again, because it's clearly not obliterated if we're still talking about it today. In the long run, you have to have a way to prevent them from ever developing a nuclear bomb. And that means not just an agreement that says that, but ways to monitor it, which, by the way, we had under the Obama nuclear deal. And I'll be the first to say it wasn't a perfect deal. No agreement is perfect. But number one, it prevented them from ever building a bomb. It said that very explicitly on paper. But number two, and more importantly, it had electronic and continuous electronic monitoring and intrusive inspections so that we could catch them if they tried to break the agreement. And Trump's own first administration certified that, in fact, they were following the agreement. So in the long run, it was incredibly dumb for Trump to rip up this agreement. Just imagine the different path we could be on if, instead of saying, we ripped up the agreement, we don't have any way to account for the nuclear program, so we're just going to try to bomb it, and it didn't work the first time, so we're going to bomb it again, and we'll probably be back another time to bomb it a third time. Imagine if instead we said, hey, we got this diplomatic agreement, but it wasn't perfect. It didn't include ballistic missiles, so let's try to get another diplomatic agreement. And guess what? Most countries that have one diplomatic agreement, turns out it works well for both sides. That's kind of the definition. So they want another one. We could be on an entirely different path with an entirely different, moderate, empowered Iranian regime right now if Trump had not made that fatal error back in his first term.
And clearly, I mean, pulling out could leave the region in a much, much worse state, especially if the same type of leadership structure is in place. And we should, of course, mention as well that no one has really seen or heard from the new Ayatollah, and there are question marks around his health and his ability to lead the country. I'll hand over to you, Suzanne.
Well,
I wanted to follow up on something you said, Seth. Agree on what we hear publicly in the Middle East versus what we hear privately. And of course, freedom of information, it's not a democracy. Like, the Gulf is not a democracy. The countries in the Gulf are not a democracy. We need to make that clear for our audience who, may not recognize that immediately. And therefore, freedom of press and freedom of speech, that's not a thing. And they are very much wanting to project that everything is fine, particularly in Dubai, where I used to live, because it relies so much on expats. That being said, they're projecting that they want the regime gone. Is that not what you're hearing privately?
What I'm hearing privately is that they're getting decimated, that not only is their infrastructure to export energy and whatnot getting decimated, but their whole business model, which is that this is a safe, happy, wonderful place to come and live and do business, is being exploded by this conflict. And so they've got to bring it to an end. I mean, the economic consequences that Trump has unleashed are going to be devastating to this part of the world. Because it used to just say, go to Dubai on vacation. Like, I mean, it might sound far away, but like, it's amazing. And actually the airlines are publicly subsidized by these countries, so you can get there relatively inexpensively. I mean, this was their whole business proposition. And that's been blown to smithereens by Shahed drones and ballistic missiles. none of which were being shot at these countries before before Trump started this war with Iran. So, I mean, this is so dumb. I'm just like on every level. It is so dumb. It's crushing our allies in the Middle East, not helping them. It is proving to Iran that they need to develop a nuclear weapon, that they need to rush to a nuclear bomb. It's proving to them that coming to the negotiating table is useless with the United States, because every time they've sat down, Trump has bombed them. And the last time they sat down with a different president, Trump ripped up the agreement. And we haven't even talked about the global implications of this. I mean, this is the biggest gift in the world to Xi Jinping of China. I mean, served up on a silver platter. Hey, Xi Jinping, don't worry about Taiwan because America's bogged down in the Middle East. America's used up all its munitions that we were going to use to deter and prevent you from starting a war in the Pacific in the Middle East. I mean, this is
Yeah.
so dumb and dangerous. I just,
I want to follow up with you on that because we grew up with Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, American exceptionalism. Jim is European, so he has lots of thoughts about how we grow up in America. That being said, we also believe that our military is the mightiest military in the world, and it is compared to everyone else, but not compared to all of the different theaters that seem to be opening up. I mean, one of the grievances is, why didn't the U.S. do something in January when people were being massacred in Iran in the tens of thousands, and President Trump said that he would come to help, and people were begging for his
great
help.
question.
But I was
Great
told
question.
it was because we didn't have the military hardware in the region to support.
It's a very simple answer. Because all of our military hardware was in Venezuela.
But why
Which
do
has
we have
nothing
such
to
little?
do with our
Why
national
can't we
security
handle multiple
priorities.
theaters? Like, why can't we handle?
Because
Why can't we handle the Middle East and
well,
Venezuela at the same time?
Even the United States of America only has so many aircraft carriers. But it's a really important point, because everyone kind of just sort of rolled their eyes when Donald Trump came in and said, oh yeah, forget everything that every other president has said, Democrats and Republicans, forget everything that I said in my first term. All of a sudden, our new national security priority is Venezuela. It was completely absurd. And every national security professional on both sides of the aisle, with the courage to admit it, said this. Most of them on the Republican side, behind the scenes, of course. But everyone was just sort of like, oh, whatever. He's just going to have his fun in South America, and it doesn't matter. Yeah, it matters. It matters. And tens of thousands of Iranians who were inspired in part to go protest because Trump said, I've got your backs, they're dead because he didn't have their backs. Because he put all his aircraft carriers in Venezuela. What? To get one guy? To get one guy? So we traded 30,000 Iranian innocent civilians to get one guilty guy alive. And we call that a win?
Yeah, so I know you need to wrap soon. You'd mentioned diplomatic means of resolving this. The former foreign minister, Jawad Zarif, has written a letter in the Council on Foreign Relations magazine, Foreign Affairs, and has called for an end to the 47-year war with America. I found that surprising because Death to America is a pillar of the Islamic Republic. So does that mean they're doing like a rebrand? The IRGC, kind of IRGC linked people and publications are now calling him a traitor, and it looks like he might be in danger. In fact, I emailed with him, and he said that he had security conditions and wasn't able to speak, but a essay was a different story. So that kind of gives you like reading between the tea leaves what position he's in. I guess I wanted to say, you ran for president of the United States. If you had won,
You're one of the
and you
only
were
people who
president right
remembers
now,
that.
I remember. If you had won, what would you be doing in this point in time?
I never would have put myself in this position or put our country or our troops in this position, because I would have honored the agreement that we had under Obama, and I would have strengthened it. I would have built on it, and I would have done everything in my power to empower the moderates, the reformers, the regime changers who are already in Iran. These amazing, heroic civilians. who, by the way, were more organized back then than they are now, who really were pushing for regime change, because that is the only long-term pathway to peace. That is the only way that ultimately we can be more safe in the West, in the Gulf, in Israel. That is the way to win. That is the way to win. Trump is losing.
What is your message to the people of Iran? Because Iranians inside the country follow me, follow us. What is your message to the people, particularly those, who have been fighting for freedom?
That at the end of the day, the American people are on your side, even if our commander in chief is not. And that's the important thing to remember about a democracy. America is not perfect. America makes mistakes. And I think we made a horrific mistake in electing Donald Trump to be president again. But there are a lot of us here who are going to do everything we can to stop him and his madness. And at the end of the day, the American people and the pro-American Iranian people have more in common than we have that separates us, that divides us. And the long-term future should be one of peace and prosperity for both nations.
Congressman Seth Moulton, thank you so much. Also, candidate for Senate in the state of Massachusetts. Good luck in your election. This has been an episode of Global Power Shifts. I'm Suzanne Kianpour, my co-host Jim Stenman. Please follow us wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and we will hopefully have Seth on our show again. Thank you.
Take care.